Hello and welcome to another edition of Football Express. I'm Stephen Looney and joining me in the studio today are Jim Ervin, Glenn Ferguson, Mark McIntosh. You're all very welcome. As ever, a quick recap on recent events in local football. Looking back to last weekend, Sports Direct Premiership, Friday, January 16th, Linfield 0, Larne 0. Saturday, January 17th, Bangor 1, Portadown 0. Cliftonville 1, Carrick Rangers 4. Coleraine 5, Crusaders 1. Dungannon Swifts 2, Ballymena United 0. Glenavon 1, Glentoran 2. There were some Irish Cup replays during the week. Well, there was meant to be 3. There was only 1. Ballymena United Larne postponed, Lochgall and Breda postponed, Glentoran 4, Strabane Athletic 0. Then, of course, we had the County Antrim Shield final on Tuesday night. It finished Carrick Rangers 1, Cliftonville 1 after normal time. Went to penalties and Carrick won 4-2. We'll talk about that. And looking ahead to the weekend fixtures, Sports Direct Premiership this weekend. Friday, January 23rd, Coleraine against Glenavon, Larne versus Bangor. Saturday, January 24th. Ballymena United versus Portadown, Carrick against Dungannon Swifts, Crusaders versus Linfield, and finishing on Sunday, January 25th, with Glentoran against Cliftonville at the Oval. Jim, welcome aboard. Good to have you on. Thanks for joining us. First things first, first trophy of the season up for grabs on Tuesday night. Carrick Rangers emerged victorious from Seaview, took a penalty shootout. Ryan Kern scored for the Reds before half-time, while substitute Adam Lackey equalised before the penalty shootout. Let me ask you this, Jim, cutting to the chase. We'll talk about the victory and the manner of the victory, but will the victory in the Shield final affect either of the two teams for the remainder of the season?
I think from Carrick's point of view, it should give them a huge confidence boost. Not just the victory on Tuesday night, but also following that up from the impressive result on Saturday against Cliftonville. You look around the experience that they have in the squad, they're now starting to get injured players back fit, which will only help as well. So certainly I would imagine Carrick will be on the up here. You know, they'll get a big massive lift. I think the thing for Stephen is he'll hope that they can carry this on and don't come Saturday, you know, they have a disappointing result. But certainly from the last 2 games that I've seen from them, they've looked very, very good. Like I say, the experience they have in the squad with the youth around it, you know, certainly Carrick are in a good place at this moment in time, and they'll be looking that run to continue this weekend.
Thanks, Jim. Yes, indeed, Glenn. You know, if you'd have gone back a few weeks' time, you know, you'd have thought, well, Cliftonville were the form team. Carrick Rangers were and still are languishing near the bottom. As Jim says, recent performances, Stephen's got a lot of the big players back, and they've been very impressive. I've talked before about the power of Danny Gibson down the right, the pace of Paul Heatley on the left, despite his age. Now, Carrick hammered Cliftonville at the weekend. Now, Cliftonville were without a lot of their main defenders. We'll talk about that. Or in case we know, went to Shelburne. Jack Keeney wasn't available and is now going to Corpus Christi in Texas. Johnny Addis had the flu. And I thought Johnny really shored up the defence against Carrick on Tuesday night. But let me ask you, overall, the game itself, was it a fair result? Was it what you expected?
Yeah, I think when you look at the overall 90 minutes, I think it was a fair result. But you got to give Stephen Baxter enormous credit to make a change at half-time. Managers are judged on the decisions they make throughout the game to benefit their team. Matthew Snoddy just picked up a yellow card just before half-time, and a big game like that, you know, one more tackle, he could end up down to 10 men, and ultimately the game could be over. But he made a quick decision, took Matthew off, brought Adam Lackey on, dropped Paul Heatley a little bit deeper to get on the ball and run, and I thought it worked brilliantly for them. I thought Carrick were the better team in the second half. They put Cliftonville under a lot of pressure. Adam Lackey was a target man. His touch, his control, his awareness to bring people into the game totally changed the game. I thought Joe Gormley done that in the first half to a certain extent. Adam Lackey took over in the second half, and I think Carrick then took control of the game. And for me, thoroughly deserved the win on chances created, albeit Liam McStravick had a great chance near the end of the second half. But I thought Carrick had other chances. You know, Lackey had a great effort to keep her safe, and a couple of half chances in around it. And then when it goes to penalties, you know, it goes down to experienced heads and who can handle it. And it was Carrick's night. They handled it okay. And as you say, they had the experienced players, Jimmy Gallagher, Billy Joe Burns, boys they got stepping up to take penalties, and they've done really well on the night.
Thanks, Glenn, certainly. And Luke McCulloch, Joe Crow, I mean, these top players. Stephen's gone for experience, tried and tested, and well, he's done it. I mean, it's only the third trophy in Carrick's history, senior trophy. Mark, I'm going to ask you, I must say I was a bit surprised that Cliftonville let Oran Casey go last week. I wondered, could they not have held, particularly in bearing in mind the sort of injury crisis that they had. Sort of similar, how will it affect both teams, the result going towards the end of the season?
I think it can only give Carrick a lot of optimism. You know, we all knew, with looking at their squad, the experience they have, we all expected them to have a better season than they're having. And it's funny, every time I watch Carrick, I'm amazed they are where they are in the league. They all seem to do quite well. But it has to give them confidence. But I keep bleating on about the same thing. With that amount of experience in the team, the longer the season goes on, to me, there's always a risk, you know, of players picking up injuries and missing games. And I think if that experienced spine of that team disappear, then there could be problems. And that would slightly concern me. But for Carrick, you know, the whole club should get a major lift from this. For Cliftonville, you know, we sat here a couple of weeks ago talking about them as the form team. But yet again, you know, players have left the club, and it seems to be what Jim has to keep contending with. You know, since he came into the job, players have left the club. And yet here we are, and it's another cup final for them. I think he's done an unbelievable job, but it's going to be difficult. You know, Oran Casey was probably one of the best defenders in the country. And who knows, like maybe there was promises given to him that if a full-time club came in, he could leave, I don't know. So I wasn't overly surprised that he left in this window, but it's a major blow with him and Jack Keeney in the same window. It's a huge gap to fill for them.
Yes, indeed, and the Reds got a right few quid for Casey. It was a record transfer fee in the League of Ireland, we're told now. I don't think they got any money for Keeney, because I think he had been in America or had told the club, I have aspirations to go, and the club had a gentleman's agreement where they, you know, wouldn't stand in their way. But I'm just wondering about Cliftonville. Now, I'm opening it up a wee bit as well. You know, in the background, all this, the Reds had a members' meeting on Monday night in the North Belfast Christian Fellowship Church, which ended in uproar after none of the resolutions were heard. You know, that was on the TIG proposal to take over the club and motions to remove Chairman Kieran Harding and 2 directors. It's messy in the background and can't help the mood in the camp. And I pick up on what you say about that Jim's had to deal with this. I looked at the cup final last year, when they lost to Dungannon. 6 of the starting lineup have now left Cliftonville. I think the year before, I think there might be only 3 players from the cup team that won the final. So where are Cliftonville at the minute, Mark? In a state of flux, is that fair?
Yeah, I don't even think they know where they are. That's the problem. Like I said, Jim was constantly having to juggle balls. He's losing so many players, and yes, they got money in for Casey, but are they going to be able to invest that money? You know, the situation behind the scenes at the club is, as you say, it's a mess, it's toxic. I don't know what effect that has on the likes of Jim and Skin and his players. You know, these guys will be able to answer that better if that does have any effect. I would suspect maybe at the start it didn't, but the whole situation around the club just isn't good. And it can't be good for anyone at Cliftonville. And until that's sorted, I don't think we're going to see a stabilised Cliftonville. And the sooner it's sorted, the better.
Thanks, Mark.
Yeah, I think you got to feel a bit for Jim and Jared. You know, I've known Jared and Jim for years. Jared is a very good coach, and he has his way of coaching. Jim obviously has good contacts where he can bring players in. But when you're a manager, and I'm sure Jim can allude to it, you want a bit of consistency where you can get a squad of players in, you can work on a system, work on the players get to know each other, know what way they play when they go to play a game. It just seems that when a manager takes over, they have to sometimes go through a transitional period. Jim seems to be doing that every year now. And for a manager and a coach, it's almost nearly impossible to do that every year, to keep the turnover and the churning out players, bringing new ones in, trying to get into a philosophy of the club and try to get them the style of play that they want. So I think, I don't know the whole ins and outs of the mess going on in the background, but they need to get that one sorted first and foremost, and then have continuity in the players and the squad. You know, like the match last weekend when they were beaten heavily by Carrick, when you lose 3 or 4 players, you're hoping to have the strength and depth to come in to contain with that. Cliftonville didn't have it, and they paid the price for it. And then the players who didn't play have now to try to come in the cup final, and it's a change again. And again, Carrick have done a number on them. You know, so I feel for Jim and Jared, 2 good guys, 2 good football men, and they seem to be dealing with problems every season now.
Thanks, Glenn. firefighting, Jim. It's common in the modern game for managers as well. Let me ask you, in your experience as a player and a manager, is it hard when there's discontent in the background, whether it be in the boardroom or on the stands? Can you insulate your players and keep them focused?
As much as you're going to say no, when you're in that environment at the time, you're going to go, no, there's nothing we can do to affect it. Psychologically, it's always in the back of your head. Players will be talking about it, the staff will be talking about it, the players will probably be asking the staff questions about what's going on. I think maybe the timing of this meeting on Monday night wasn't particularly good because it was the night before the cup final. Obviously the meeting hasn't ended well, and then now they've went on and they've lost the first cup final. So the timing of things hasn't been great. But going back to what Jim's dealing with, I think, you know, the year they win the Irish Cup, he lost his front three. They all left that summer, which is really difficult. You know, as Glenn will probably say to you as well, you know, strikers and forward players are hard to come by, and to replace three is extremely difficult. To them, for him to go on and achieve what he done last year too, and get into another cup final and the League Cup as well. Now it seems roles reversed. It's now the back line's getting hit, you know, and they've lost player after player, and he's trying to replace. And as you say, you want that consistency with players. But when you're constantly losing your best players and you're maybe unable to bring in, with all due respect, players that are maybe not as good as the ones that have left, you have to then be allowed a bit of a bedding in time. And I just think that the number of players they lose constantly in the same window, it's very, very difficult for Jim and Skin to bring that number of players back in and get them to gel quickly with the boys that's already there. Plus, when you look at the injuries that they've had, you know, it's difficult for Jim and Skin to get their best 11 players out onto the pitch at any given time. And when you're not able to do that and you're not able to consistently put the same team out, it then it becomes difficult. And there's no game in this league is a gimme. And when you can't consistently put the same team out, results do be affected.
Well, Jim, thanks for that insight. Yes, indeed. I think that's good for the Shield final. We're going to look ahead to the weekend fixtures, guys, if that's all right. Friday night, Coleraine play Glenavon at home, Larne play Bangor, also at home. Jim, stay with you. Which of the title contenders has the more difficult task at the weekend? Larne going well, we know, top of the league. Coleraine have come good, but they've shipped a couple of defeats. And I'm looking at the opposition as well. Bangor newly up this year, doing really, really well under Lee Feeney. And Glenavon, Mark, you and I have talked about it before. Think about how we've seen some sort of shoots coming from Michael O'Connor, and I think that'll maybe continue. Maybe not this weekend. Coleraine, Glenavon, Larne, Bangor. How do you think it's going to go, Jim?
I think it's going to be two difficult games, obviously, for Bangor and Glenavon respectively. You know, going away from home. Coleraine seem to be at the showgrounds. You know, they hit a lot of form. They've scored plenty of goals in recent weeks at the showgrounds. And when you've got the players like Matthew Shevlin, Joel Cooper, you know, Will Patching on the pitch, anything can happen. So it's going to be an extremely difficult game, I think, for Glenavon. But they've shown before, I think they went up and lost narrowly when Michael first came in at Coleraine. But with the way Coleraine have hit a wee bit of form again, I think, at this minute in time, and it'll be important for Rory to make sure that they keep on top and keep progressing. Larne are, you know, it wasn't that long ago people weren't talking about Larne, and Gary came right onto the radar with his team. And they're now sitting at top. They've a really good lead there now at this minute in time. Bangor have beaten them already this year, so they know with Lee Feeney's team that it's not going to be straightforward. Bangor will be extremely difficult to play against come Friday night, and they'll go to Larne and try and get something from it. I think if I'm looking at it just based on form and how things are going, I don't see anything other than 2 home wins come the weekend.
Thanks, Jim, for that. Glenn, similar subject. What do you think?
Yeah, I have to agree with Jim. I can only see 2 home wins, but I think crucially in both games, the first goal is so important. If Coleraine seem to go in front, they seem to play with a lot more confidence. You know, all the new players are all gelling, but they are confidence players. They're flair players. You have Joel Coopers and Will Patchings and players like that. They will dominate games if you let them. So I think if the first goal goes to Coleraine, they'll certainly win the game. Larne aren't conceding an awful lot of goals, which is, you know, championship winning teams in form. I think Larne will be too strong. I think as much as Glenavon are doing a bit better, I think Larne will have too much for them, particularly at home, and I think they'll continue to move further ahead in the table.
Thanks, Glenn. Mark, finish with you on the two Friday night games. Again, Larne against Bangor, Coleraine against Glenavon. And I'll be honest with you, I am praying for a good match on it for Friday night TV because, you know, it's been like pulling teeth recently in some games. Listen, it has to be said, that's not just the Irish League, that's across the board in modern football, in my opinion. Mark, go ahead, Friday night, please.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm praying it's a good game. You know, it tells you something that, in December, the World Cup draw was more entertaining than the Friday night game in the Irish League, and the World Cup draw was awful. I'm like the lads, I can only see 2 home victories, I'm being honest. Although for Larne, I think it will be a very difficult game because we've seen what Bangor can do this season, home and away. And the tighter the game is, the longer it goes without a goal. I think Bangor fancy their chances. It was great to see Stephen Fallon score the winner for them last week. You know, Stephen Fallon has had an awful time with injuries. There's no doubt in the quality he has. But at Linfield, obviously, he had so many injuries and he didn't really play many games at Coleraine. So it's great to see him back, and that quality will give them another chance. As for Glenavon and Coleraine, I can only see a Coleraine victory. You know, they've responded well from let's be honest, it was a pathetic performance at Larne a few weeks ago. But they've responded well. The likes of Mark Connolly has settled in. He scored a couple of goals from defence. You know, Mark Hoyle, I don't even know if he started a game yet, but you know, he will only add to that as well. So I can only see a Coleraine victory.
Thanks, Mark. I'm going to stay with you as we go to Saturday's games. Ballymena against Portadown, Carrick against the Swifts, and Cruise against Linfield. And I'm going to start with the Cruise and the Blues. Crusaders were on the receiving end of 2 thumpings from Coleraine in the league and the cup. The Blues lost 3 in a row before Christmas. They rallied to beat Bangor twice, then endured 2 scoreless draws against Carrick and Larne. Must be said, there were 10 men against Carrick. David Healy is ringing the changes at Windsor as Callum Morrison and Sam Roscoe leave the club, while Darren Leahy and Adam Frizzell arrive from Waterford and Derry City respectively. And there will be more changes in the coming weeks and months, I would suggest. Cruise did well over Christmas, as I said, but have been hammered recently. And also, we hear that the Cruise may be losing more experience. They don't have any experienced players, but the Glens look like they're in for a double sweep for Ross Clark and Jarlath O'Rourke. How do you see this game going? And I have to preface it by saying, Linfield, you talk about maybe a disenchantment in the background at Cliftonville. I sense it at Windsor. I sense a sense of deflation on many areas, you know, with results and performances on the pitch. There's matters unease in the boardroom. Supporters aren't happy either. Not conducive to putting in a title challenge.
No, it's not pleasant behind the scenes at Linfield at the minute. And on the pitch, it's certainly not convincing. You know, the fans have made their feelings known on that. And, you know, they've even been criticising singing, sack the board at games as well. And I think everyone knows in football when that starts happening, that's when board members get jittery. But look, Crusaders played Linfield at Windsor Park a few weeks ago. We discussed it in this show. It was one of the worst defensive performances I've ever seen in the Irish League. Since then, I think the Crews have been very, very good. You know, they've shown a different side to them. Daggy's been able to get a few players back. You know, Fraser Brighton scoring a few goals again. So it'll be a very, very different game to that. I don't expect Linfield to go there and get it easy at all. I think Linfield are struggling to score goals. You know, we saw that even the last couple of minutes against Larne. You know, Glenn Ferguson's couple of saves in the late stages of the game were incredible. And on that tight pitch at CV, you know, to me it's vital that Linfield get the first goal. But I think Linfield fans would tell you right now they just don't really know where that first goal's coming from. So if I was Crusaders, I would be quietly optimistic.
Really? Okay, thank you. Glenn, I'll come to you, and I want to look at it from a Crusaders point of view and sort of widen it out again, because Mark spoke well there about the Crews. You know, it's been a tough season for Declan Cadell. We know about the budget being slashed, and they're all very, very, very young team indeed. I just wonder, playing with the home advantage, I think Carrick will have a good end of the season. I think Glenavon will get wins as well before the end of the season. I don't think Crusaders are safe and dry just yet, Glenn.
No, and listen, the proof will be in the pudding. If Ross Clark does leave, Jarlath O'Rourke leaves, who's to say Crusaders are going to hold on to Fraser Brighton as well? You know, the main goal threat. You know, so if you lose 2 really experienced players and you lose your goal scorer, you know, there's going to be trouble ahead to try and pick up results. It's going to be very difficult for them. So Daggy will have his work cut out. And we know he can pull players out of the hat from Scotland and the contacts he has. He may well have to do that again to try and get strength and depth in to help them see the season through. But again, I'm with you. I don't think it's going to be easy for them the rest of the season. You know, we got to give Carrick a huge amount of credit where they are. You know, losing 7-0 to Glentoran, then coming back and drawing with Linfield, and then beating Cliftonville, and then winning a trophy. Their tails are going to be up, so they're going to be wanting to pull clear. And Crusaders are the ones who they'll be looking to catch, and I think it's going to be tight for them. And Glenavon, as you say, will make it tough for them as well. And if they bring another couple of players in, who knows what will happen. So Crusaders will really have to dig deep here and call on all their resources to try and get results.
And on Saturday's game, Cruising the Blues, how do you see
Yeah,
it?
yeah, it'll be tight. There's no doubt about it. It's always tough going to Seaview, but I agree. If Linfield get the first goal, I think they'll definitely win the game. But you know, Matthew Fitzpatrick, sometimes you feel he's playing a lone furrow up there, and certainly needs help. So hopefully Linfield can get more bodies at the top end of the pitch, create more chances, and score more goals.
Thanks, Glenn. Jim, I'm going to tap into your experience. You graced Windsor Park as a player, won everything, and then in management side of things, you had a flavour of what it's like down at the bottom. Your first season, you avoided relegation in the playoffs, and well done. Your old club, the Blues, where are they at the minute, and how do you see Saturday's game going?
I think Linfield at the minute have found it difficult, whereas in years gone by, Linfield were the main team, and everybody would have came for Linfield and would have went the lengths and breadths to come to Windsor Park. With the way the full time has went, with Larne obviously going first full time, and then Coleraine and Glentoran following suit, they've found it maybe more difficult and haven't got the pick of the players that they once had. I think the other thing being too with Linfield, it takes a certain type of character to go to Windsor Park and deal with the pressures that come with playing for Linfield. And I think maybe a number of signings over the last number of years maybe haven't been able to cope with that pressure. And I think when you're looking back at, you know, when you lose Chris Shields and you lose Jamie Mulgrew for quite a lot of the season, and you're looking at different players to come in and take the bull by the horns, you know, and stand up and be counted for. With some of the signings that they've made, they haven't really kicked on. And it's frustrating probably for David too, because he's putting his neck on the line, bringing these boys in, hoping that they're going to be able to cope with it. And for one reason or another, they just haven't been able to. And you're quite rightly saying that they've been disappointing to a degree on the pitch. But I think when you look at the number of injuries, I took the game in against Crusaders that Mark was talking about, and I counted, I think there was 8 senior players missing that day. Kieran Offord, Chris Shields, Jamie Mulgrew was on the bench and come on late on. Scott Whiteside, Cammy Ballantyne, Ewan East was injured at that moment in time. Came back but has since went out again injured. So similar to what we were talking about, Jim, earlier on with Cliftonville being unable to get a settled squad out, David has been exactly the same. You know, he's Ethan McGee's an outstanding right back. He's having to play him right back. Sean Brown has even went into centre back at times too. And he's probably putting players, like, you know, putting square pegs in round holes. And it's very difficult because regardless of that going on at Linfield, supporters don't look at that. Board will not look at that. They just look at results. And sometimes they don't take into context what's actually going on with the players that's unavailable. But David will also know that's the pressures of being the manager of Linfield, and he's never shied away from anything. I think when you always look at him, he's always there in the camera, he's always up front. He tries to be as honest as he possibly can without going overboard or throwing players under the bus, because it's one thing that he won't do. So the pressures of being a Linfield manager, you have to deal with that. You have to suck it up and just get on with it. But I think also some of the players that have come in, they have to stand up and go and show the manager what they can do and what they're made of, and ultimately what it's like to play for Linfield. Because I think that's the thing. You know, we looked at Friday night, and when you're looking at comments that the supporters are making, Friday night was much more of a performance that the fans want to see. They fought for every ball. They went to the final whistle. Whereas in games previous, I think they've maybe felt that they haven't done that. They haven't had that fight. But that's speaking from a fan, and that's speaking from the outside. Obviously, as players, there's no way any player pulls on that Linfield shirt, goes out to have a bad game, or goes out not to give 100%. Sometimes it goes for you, and sometimes it doesn't. And you just got to deal with that. And I think that we're now at a crucial stage of the season for Linfield, and it's usually where Linfield becomes strong. And come Saturday at Seaview, it's going to be really difficult. But David will be looking at his experienced players and thinking, come on ahead, guys. Let's give us something here for this last part of the season.
Thanks, Jim. Yes, I'm just going to finish with you, Mark. Go ahead.
Yeah, the one thing I'll say about Linfield, though, and look, the job David Healy's done is remarkable, and I've no doubt he will be very good again in the future. My issue with Linfield is, you spoke about Chris Shields and Jamie Mulgrew. Linfield are still so heavily reliant on Jamie Mulgrew, and that's the biggest indictment. You know, what Jamie has done at his age is a credit to himself, absolutely sensational. But for Linfield, they can't be reliant on Jamie Mulgrew. There has to be more than that.
Well, this is what I was going to ask you, and maybe I'll ask you as a journalist, because, and myself from the outside, I look at Jamie Mulgrew as the last of the Mohicans, the throwback to the glorious clean sweep era and all that under David Jeffrey. Linfield have been squeezed in recent years, financially, in terms of they can't. Linfield traditionally bought the best centre forward, the best centre midfielder, the best centre half in the league. Right? They're not doing that anymore. They're having to go outside the league, and I'm not sure that works for Linfield. Certainly at the minute, I'm not sure. I'm going to say Linfield have lost their identity. Not really, but let's put it like this: I think there's going to be a changing of the guard in the summer. Yeah, well, look, I think the board, or maybe the penny's starting to drop with the Linfield board, that not everyone wants to sign for Linfield. Something Jim said earlier about years gone by, every player would have wanted to sign for Linfield. That's not the case anymore, because money talks, and if they can get more money elsewhere, that's what they'll do, as they're quite entitled to do. So Linfield board have to get real. I'm not sure that they're anywhere close to getting real just yet. And unfortunately, they're going to have to realise that you're going to have to speculate to accumulate. If the full-time clubs are all spending money, they're going to go ahead of Linfield if they don't follow suit. So I still would expect more business this month for that reason. But yeah, you're right, there will be a change in the guard. David Healy spoke recently about the fact that he's probably going to have to change things around and revamp the team again. But he's shown before, every time he's done that, Linfield have been successful, so why should people doubt him now? Well, indeed, and I think Linfield are playing for second place and guaranteed European qualification.
On that one, Stephen, too, as Mark said, when you look at David Healy's record, at what he has done, so back him. Back him and give him the funds to get the players in that he feels will make Linfield the force again that's going to compete on every single stage. You have to back him. He's warranted being backed because he's shown that when he has the tools, he can deliver. So you have to back him.
Well, indeed, I think David would agree with you, but things are tight. They're keeping an eye on the money there in the future. We'll return to that subject again. I want to look elsewhere now, Mark, wrap it up. And on the Saturday, Ballymena United against Portadown, Carrick against Dungannon Swifts. Dungannon are having a good season. I'm sort of wondering, Ballymena manager Oran Kearney has been busy signing Shane McElhaney, Sean Murray, Dean Ebba and Igor Rutkowski, with Josh Carson, moving to the Ports. Stephen Baxter said he would happily forego the Shield success if he would be guaranteed 3 points, on Saturday. And I kind of get that. Can Carrick build on the Shield success against the Dungannon team that has the same number of points as the Blues?
Look, we said earlier, if winning a trophy doesn't breed confidence, I don't know what will. Carrick would have to be very confident going into the game, but as you rightly said, Dungannon have had a good season after a very, very disappointing start to the season, which was maybe always likely after winning the Irish Cup. We suspected that might happen a little bit. But to me, that could be a cracking game. For Carrick, those 3 points are more important than the Shield victory, as good as that was, and they'll always look back at it in history, but staying in the league is the most important thing. As far as Ballymena and Portadown go, toss of a coin, because both teams, sometimes you don't know what you're going to get. I've said before, I like what Portadown are doing quite a bit, but every so often they throw in a very ragged performance and some disappointing results. And for Ballymena, again, you just don't know. The same players can deliver one week and then the next week they don't. Oran Kearney's tried to freshen it up. He's certainly been backed. Probably will continue to get backed. So I think it's going to be a very interesting time between now and the end of the season for Ballymena. But as far as this weekend goes, toss of a coin for me.
Thanks, Mark. Spike, I want to ask you about Ballymena. You manage Ballymena yourself, like Jim. Oran has sort of said the results haven't gone his way now. He hasn't had the bounce effect that he maybe would have wanted. I mentioned the players he's brought in, and he says he wants players to hit the ground running, i.e. off the peg, ready to play an Irish League. what do you make of it at the showgrounds? Bearing in mind, funny, recently, Oren talked about it not being a project. As we discussed in the show before Christmas, it should be a 3 to 5 year project. Not so. Ballymena.
The Ballymena fans want Ballymena to win, and there's no doubt about that. But they've no divine right to. I think sometimes when you look at the Ballymena, the supporters think they deserve, or they are better than some other teams. They have to realise where they are to a certain extent. I watched the highlights last week against Dungannon, and Dungannon absolutely battered them. And although the result was only 2-0, it could easily have been 4 or 5. So Ballymena will have to improve and improve quickly if Warren wants to start getting results. And again, we're talking about the transition of players. It's just not a straight fix. Having players off the peg and thrown straight back into a team. These players mightn't have played together, and they don't know what the strengths and weaknesses are, how someone's movement's going to be. So Ballymena, it isn't going to happen overnight, and they're definitely going to have to work hard at it. But I agree with Mark, those teams on any given day, you just don't know what you're going to get. I would fancy Dungannon to go on a run. Carrick should be buoyed with the Shield result, but when you haven't won a trophy in so long, it just depends how much the players have celebrated after winning a trophy, because I've been there with Ballymena, and albeit just winning the County Antrim Shield and having the players having let's say a celebratory drink even the next day. So they'll have to be very careful what they do leading into Saturday's game. They'll need to be prepared for the game, because they've won a trophy, and when you've won a trophy, teams want to pick you off and want to beat you. Carrick will have to stand up to that.
Thanks, Glenn. Before we come to the final game of the weekend, Jim, 2 of your former clubs, Ballymena and Carrick, against 2 mid-Ulster clubs, Portadown and Dungannon Swifts. Who's going to come out on top?
I think the Carrick one's going to be an interesting one, because they're going to be looking to see their tails are up. They've had 2 really good wins this week, with beating Cliftonville away 4-1, which is an impressive result away from home, and then following it up with the County Antrim Shield. So they're back at Taylor's Avenue. So it'll be now what way did Dungannon approach the game. Obviously the Dungannon teams that we all know, they're free-flowing football. They like to get the ball down, they like to get running at people. With Carrick's pitch, it's maybe not going to suit their style of play to a degree, but I can remember last year I took a game in Carrick and Dungannon. I was doing a bit for the radio, and Dungannon went down and they completely changed their approach, and they went long. Big Mitch played up front that day, and they were very direct and played Carrick at their own game, and they actually win the game 1-0. So it'll be interesting to see if Rod does the same this time round, because Carrick are very direct, but with the experience that they have, they will probably be able to deal with it a wee bit more this year than what they did last season. So it's an interesting one, because, like I say, Dungannon's having a very impressive season again, building on last year's Irish Cup success, and Carrick's tails are up, obviously, from the County Antrim Shield game. So it's going to be an interesting one. I wouldn't be surprised if it's a goalless draw there.
Not another one, thanks, Jim.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks for that, guys. Just want to finish on Sunday, Glentoran against Cliftonville. The Glens will be on a high after beating Strabane in the Cup. Pat Hooban grabbed a brace there. Cliftonville will be hurting, and they need defenders badly after the departures of the aforementioned Casey and Keeney. So, on paper, you might fancy a home win, Jim. Is that fair? Although I have to say, do you remember, Cliftonville lost the Cup final last year, but showed great character to bounce back within days and win the European playoffs. Different team this year. So Glentoran, Cliftonville. Glentoran probably certainly the more confident team. Glentoran
would be the more confident team, the more informed team. Glentoran this while back have been mightily impressive. The thing that's impressed me with the Glens this last number of weeks is their work ethic off the ball. It's okay having the work ethic when you're on the ball, but to chase players down and get into people's faces when you're out of possession, it's the one thing that's impressed me with Declan Devine's team this last number of weeks, is how hard they work to get the ball back, and then when they get the ball back, they punish you. Cooney has been exceptional for them. Pat Hooban is doing what he does, score goals, and if he sniffs a chance, he's hard to stop. I'm going to be honest with you, it reminds me of Glenn. When Glenn got a sniff of goal, he put the ball in the back of the net. And for the games, I've watched Pat Hooban 2 or 3 times the last number of weeks, and when he gets an opportunity, he scores goals. I would never write Cliftonville off, because as you rightly said, they lost to Dungannon in the Irish Cup final last year, and it would have been very easy for them to go to the Oval and lose that game. But the character that team had to bounce back and obviously win the European playoff. I think the Glens are a different team, and with the players that Cliftonville have lost this last number of weeks, it's going to be difficult for them. And Glentoran have a good bit of momentum, and they're in a good place at this moment in time. So I would imagine the Glens will come out victorious on Sunday.
Thank you, Jim. Spike, you're a blue man from the east, so you know the big two very, very well, and you follow it closely. Where are Glentoran at the minute? There's a lot to like, but maybe I don't know. They've gone again. I think they're not giving. I think they're going for the title, but maybe a bit like Linfield. If they don't reel Larne in, they want that second place.
Yeah, 100%. And as Jim said, Pat Hoban is the difference. He is a focal point. He's a goal scorer. He links the play up well. He drops deep, gets on the ball, and to me, he is making Glentoran tick this year. And I've spoken to a couple of people who I know who work inside the Oval, and the standards that he sets in training, not just in games, in training, is now bouncing off the other players. And I think the penny's starting to drop what it takes to be a top player. And I think the Glentoran players are now buying into it simply because of what Pat Hoban's brought to the table. And I think it's been a masterstroke by Declan Devine, getting Pat in and then developing the sort of younger players. And Danny Amos was back now at left back, and you've Cooney, two attacking fullbacks. This team create chances, and I think they will have too much for Cliftonville. But simply because of the Pat Hoban effect, I think Glentoran will kick on and pick up more points than they'll drop. Where in years gone by, we know they have the tendency to go into an inconsistent period where they go through terrible matches and don't pick up points. I don't think going forward now they're going to have that. I think they're going to be pretty stabilised till the end of the season, and they'll be a challenge.
Thanks, Glenn. I'm always minded of Roy Coyle many years ago when he signed Michael O'Neill. And he said something similar to Glenn, Mark. He would say that, bringing in a player with those standards, and it really got a reaction from the players, because when they saw him coming in the room, they're like, oh, he's a serious player, and Pat Hoban is the same. I would think that Pat Hoban reminds you of Spike. I think Spike was the better performer all round. Mark, I put it to you, I think that Glentoran may be too strong for the Reds, regardless of what's going on in the background of Solitude, regardless of their defeat on Tuesday night.
Yeah, I would agree. Glentoran look like they'll score goals. And it's not just Pat Hoban. They've added a bit of quality. Obviously, Jack Malone's at the club now. He adds quality in midfield as well, and he can score goals. He scored quite a few goals for Glenavon before his move. I can't see anything other than a Glentoran victory. The only note of caution, I would say, we've all liked a lot of things that Glens have done this season, but when you're bringing so many players into the club in January, one, you're going to have to keep everyone happy, but also if you're trying to add too many players into a side that are already quite impressive, that can maybe, it can go one of two ways, I guess, but that's going to be a challenge for the Glens. But when it comes to Sunday, I can't see anything other than a Glens win.
Thanks, Mark, and that brings us to the end of the show, so it just remains for me to thank you again, Mark. Glenn, thanks as ever. Jim, great to have you on. I hope you'll be back soon in the game as well. And thank you for joining us here on Football Express. That's it for now. We'll see you the next time.